يا راغبا في كل علم نافع.
ينمو العلم ويتقدم بتقنياته ومجالاته، ومعه نطور أدواتنا في تقديم العلم الشرعي. أكاديمية
زاد أكاديمية ينبوعها صاف ليروي غلة الظمآن. هذه عقيدتنا الصحيحة فطرة تنفي الشكوك بواضح البرهان. بشرى لنا زاد أكاديمية للعلم كالأزهار في البستان.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Continuing with the subject of Islamic Creed level 3 and continuing with the subject of al-kufr or disbelief. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from it, and that al-kufr or disbelief is of two categories. The major one, kufrun akbar, and kufr asghar, or a minor one. And the purpose of this classification, as the ulama, they mentioned from the perspective of Aqeedah, not to belittle an act of disbelief, but rather to avoid falling into making takfir or calling people disbelievers when they commit certain acts, that a person might confuse it or think that these acts are mentioned in the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ being attributed to the act of kufr. So that's why there is major and minor kufr. We talked about the major one and the 5 different types of the major kufr. And today, inshallah ta'ala, talk briefly about the minor kufr or al-kufr al-asghar, which is basically attributing to or talking about the sins that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran and in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ called it kufr, or called the ones that would do it. The word may be kufr or kafir or so, but they are not really the disbelievers, those who renegade away from the fold of al-Islam. So al-kufr al-asghar refers to the sins, something in the categories of sins. For example, someone being ungrateful to the favors of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is called kufr ni'mah. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in the Quran, وَضَرَبَ اللَّهُ مَثَلًا قَرْيَةً كَانَتْ آمِنَةً مُطْمَئِنَّةً يأتيها رزقها رغدا من كل مكان فكفرت بأنعم الله. The example, the parable that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave of a town that was secure and in state of tranquility, its rizq, its provisions comes to it from everywhere, but then they disbelieved in the favors of Allah, basically means they were ungrateful to the favors of Allah, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punished it. And so something like this, someone is ungrateful to Allah. It depends, of course, on the level of ungratefulness, but this is not necessarily the major kufr. It's an evil thing, but not for a person to be a kafir as a result of this. The same thing with the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ when he said, سِبَابُ الْمُسْلِمِ فُسُوقٌ وَقِتَالُهُ كُفْرٌ. That when you revile a Muslim, this is fusuq, this is a major sin. And fighting a Muslim is an act of disbelief, fighting. So if someone fights, if 2 Muslims fight with each other, does it make them kuffar, disbelievers by default? The answer is no. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in the Quran in Surah Al-Hujurat, saying, وَإِن طَائِفَتَانِ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ قَتَتَلُوا فَأَصْلِحُوا بَيْنَهُمَا. If 2 groups of the believers, they fight with each other, then bring peace among them. That does not approve fighting with one another, but it's to put things in the right perspective, not to call them disbelievers as a result of them fighting with one another. But for example, if someone says that it's permissible, it's something that Allah approves of, that a Muslim kills a Muslim or Muslims fight with each other, then this is an act of a major disbelief, of course. So this is just the fact that they would fight with one another is from the category of the minor kufr. Again, not to belittle it, and that's why it should be only mentioned in the concept of al-aqeedah, so that the person doesn't fall into deviations in matters of belief. Also, when people would attack the lineage of someone or wailing for the dead, because these things are mentioned in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that they're acts of kufr. The word kufr is given to these evil and sinful acts. As the Prophet ﷺ, he said, إِثْنَتَانِ فِي النَّاسِ هُمَا بِهِمْ كُفْرٌ. 2 things among the people, this is kufr when they would do it. الطعن في النسب, when they would attack one's lineage, questioning one's lineage or attacking it, belittling it. وَالنِّيَاحَةُ عَلَى الْمَيِّتِ, and wailing as a result of someone died, which is the ways of jahiliyyah, the ways of ignorance. But if a person does this, it doesn't make him a disbeliever, but this is an act of disbelief, again from the category of the minor kufr or the minor disbelief. If someone attributes himself in lineage to other than his father while he knows his father, this is a sinful act. As the Prophet ﷺ said, لا ترغبوا عن أبائكم فمن رغب عن أبيه فهو كفر, that do not seek other than your parents to be or claiming for your lineage, because whoever does this is an act of disbelief. Someone doesn't want to be known as the son of so, or from this tribe, or from this family, so he would attribute himself to someone else. That's not permissible. But the Prophet ﷺ called this act an act of kufr, but it's not the major kufr that takes a person outside the fold of Islam. So as a result of that and what we heard previously, then what's the differences between the major kufr, the major disbelief, and the minor disbelief? The major disbelief, which is al-kufr al-akbar, takes the person outside the fold of Islam, ruins all of one's deeds. While the minor disbelief does not take him outside the fold of Islam, does not ruin all of his deeds, but then it decreases the rewards, it subjects the person to the punishment of Allah, like sins do. Sins is not a minor thing, this is a major thing, right? But what we're talking about, what takes the person outside the fold of Islam versus what keeps him still within the fold of Islam. Also, another difference is that the major kufr, if someone dies in the state of a major kufr, that person will be in the hellfire forever. That's the wa'id, that's the warning for those who are upon the major kufr. But when it comes to the minor kufr, if someone dies in that state, that means he dies in the state of Islam, but did one of these actions that are mentioned before, did not repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from it because of the major kufr. A person is a disbeliever and he repents to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of course he enters the Jannah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But we're talking about the major kufr, that person is in hellfire forever. For the minor kufr, if a person dies on that state, did not repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from it, then it's by the will of Allah. Either that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will punish him by his justice subhanahu wa ta'ala, and if he will subhanahu wa ta'ala, he would forgive him. And if that individual is punished while he died in the state of Islam, in the state of the Tawheed, he eventually will enter the Jannah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is an important differences between the major and the minor kufr. Another difference is when it comes to the major kufr, it makes the person's blood and wealth is being not protected, because this is a criminal act by the people of authority if they would apply such a rule, which is the hadd and the ruling of someone renegating away from the deen of Islam. While the minor kufr protects, even though a person is sinful, but he's still within the ummah or the Muslimin. When it comes to having a matter of authority, they won't punish him with the ruling of a ridda or renegating away from the deen of Allah. Also, one of these differences is the major kufr would bring in the hearts of the believers a special enmity. This is the pure enmity. That's why it's not permissible for the believers to have that religious love to them and to be loyal to such a person, even if he's the closest one. While the minor one, it does not prevent the loyalty in the absolute sense, but he is loved from one perspective and he's hated from another perspective. And this is the religious, this is the choice that a person would make, not the natural love that a person would have, the love of a mother, the love of a father, even if they are disbelievers. This is not what is being mentioned here. So these are the differences between or some of the differences between the major kufr and the minor kufr. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from all, but again to make sure that this is with perspective of the aqeedah, so that the person doesn't fall into claiming others are kuffar and things of that nature when they're not. And to avoid and to protect ourselves from falling into both, because there are ahkam rulings that is related to matters of this worldly matter. We'll stop here inshallah ta'ala, and next time we'll talk about shirk, associating partners with Allah, and the different types of shirk. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
يا راغبا في كل علم نافع.
ينمو العلم ويتقدم بتقنياته ومجالاته، ومعه نطور أدواتنا في تقديم العلم الشرعي. أكاديمية
زاد أكاديمية ينبوعها صاف ليروي غلة الظمآن. هذه عقيدتنا الصحيحة فطرة تنفي الشكوك بواضح البرهان. بشرى لنا زاد أكاديمية للعلم كالأزهار في البستان.